and repeat what I just said. So once again, I am, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Todd Albert, the founder and lead instructor of Boca Code, proud member of Palm Beach Tech, and sponsor of Global Entrepreneur Week. And the talk I'm giving today is one I've given before, but I think it's really relevant and important. It's how to hire the right developer for your project. So what I'm going to be talking about is, if you have a project, you have to think about, like, what are your needs? What do you, when you're talking to a developer, what do you ask them? Where do you look, and who do you look for when you look for a developer? And then I'll open things up for discussion. And let's see. All right. So first of all, I just want to set some expectations. This is like one of the most common things that happens when people come to me to hire a developer is they come and they're like, oh, I want to build this and this and this, and it's got to be super perfect and work, we're going to have 1 million users and it has to be completely bulletproof and amazing and no bugs, and my budget is $3,000. And this is just very common. They want the world, and but what they can afford is much less than that. So this is something to keep in mind, right? Like, think about what you need, what it is that, and the most important thing for what you need is, what are you building, right? What type of project are you creating? So I talk to entrepreneurs literally every day, and I talk to entrepreneurs who maybe are building a widget, let's say, and all they need is a website to promote their widget. They just need a marketing site. So that would be like the lowest level of what you're building, and pretty much, you can get a high school student to build you a marketing website, right? But that scales all the way up to somebody who's building a pretty complex application, software-based application. Maybe it's a SaaS model, all the way, to like a 3D game type system for an event, everywhere and at all points in between. So the type of your project that you're building is going to depend greatly, is going to determine who you need to hire in terms of development. And then another thing is, what is the stage of your project, right? I talk to startup companies all the time. And when you're in the startup phase, you have two goals. These aren't my laws. These are like the laws of the startup community: is reduce expenses, keep your costs as low as possible, and bring on as many clients as you can, right? Bring on as much income and keep your costs low. So the type of developer that you're going to want to hire in that phase may be very different. Where if you can outsource rather than bring on your own team at that point and have the overhead expenses of having your own team, is usually the way to go when you're in the startup phase. Once you get into the growth or expansion phases, that's when you start to think about, okay, maybe we bring in an internal team and work from there. So the stage is very important. The other thing is what we call MVP. And outside of the tech community, I've talked to some people, and this isn't always a known acronym outside outside of the tech community. But in our world, MVP stands for minimum viable product. And the best way to explain this is, every entrepreneur will start with an idea, and that idea might be small. But as you think about it, if it's a good idea and you're passionate about it, you're going to be thinking about it. You're going to be talking to people about it. And as you think about it, it's going to grow and expand, and it's going to grow legs and arms and branches and roots, and and it's going to go crazy, right? Next thing you know, you've got this big giant thing. And very often when entrepreneurs come to me, they come to me and they describe this big giant project, branches, roots, limbs and all, and that's what they want to build. That is very expensive to build. So when you're a startup, unless you have some massive, incredible amount of funding, you usually want to get back to that core idea and start by building that. What is our MVP? What is our minimum viable product? And on this call, I actually have a lot of developers right now. Rather than entrepreneurs, I have a lot of developers. Some of us are both. as a developer, when somebody comes to you with that project, part of your job is to help walk them back and scale them back to what is MVP, and get them to describe and agree with you upon what is MVP, build that, get to market, and then you could start layering in the other, additional features and things. Okay, the next thing to consider is what type of developer you need. So in our world, we talk about, and there's way more than this. I'm very much simplifying it, but we typically differentiate between front end and back end developers. And a front end developer is somebody that's actually building what the user is seeing, what is showing up in their browser for a website or on their phone for an application. That's the front end developer. The back end developer is building all of the intelligence and business logic and the data behind that. So the best analogy, Joel Lord from Red Hat gave me this great analogy that I like to borrow from him. And it's, if you walk into a restaurant, you're seeing the front end, right? That's the dining room. That's what they want you to see, right? The tables, the chairs, the waiters, the people eating and smiling, and the plates and the napkins. That's the front end of the restaurant. And the back end is where the chef is and the server, the sous chefs and the whole kitchen and refrigeration and storage and everything is going on in the back end, and you don't want your guests to typically to see that. So it's a good analogy for front end and back end development. In the third kind of developer I've listed here, I put in quotes as a full stack developer. These are people that do front end and back end, and they call themselves full stack, but oftentimes they're missing this fourth piece, which is DevOps. DevOps is, there's kind of two sides or two definitions to DevOps. I tend to think of DevOps as being deploying, actually putting your website or your application or whatever it is in the cloud, building the infrastructure for it, making it scalable. But there's more to it. It's not just putting your website or whatever up in the cloud, but it's also building out different environments, the developer environment, a staging environment where the business people can test and see things before they go live, and then your production environment, which should be highly scalable, highly available, etc. So and then there's another part of DevOps, which is making things easy for the developers to deploy, maybe automating some of that. So to be this fifth one here, which is a full stack, not in quotes, you really should be able to do front end, back end, and DevOps, at least to some degree. But then, like we have on, with Gabriel and Cameron on this call, we have people that are more specialized, right? This last one here, like game developers, right? Or people that are specialized in a certain type of development, like IoT or automation or things like that, instrumentation, computer vision, AI. There's also what I term web editor. This is a term that I've coined, which is somebody who likes to build sites in WordPress or Wix or Squarespace. This is somebody that can go in and edit your website or build through drag and drop, but they're not necessarily building you out a full-scale web application from scratch. There's mobile developers like Jonathan, who we have on the call. That's his area of specialty. Database architects and administrators who really focus on building out the database side of things. And then a systems architect who kind of talks to the client, figures out what their needs are, and then designs the system in their head, essentially, and then goes to the developers and says, okay, here's how we're going to build this. This is how we're going to architect it. This is the technology we're going to leverage and the programming languages that we use. So that's kind of a real quick and dirty. It's very generalized, but essentially a run through of different types of developers. So when you're thinking about your project and you're thinking about bringing on a developer, think about what are the skills and what are the needs for your project and what type of developer you might want. Then we get into levels of developer. And some people don't really love this language of junior, mid-level, senior, but it's, some people like to call them developer 1, 2, 3 or something like that. But it's pretty easy language, at least to understand. A junior developer is somebody who's typically fresh out of school with a CS degree, or fresh out of like a code academy, or they've been self-taught and they've worked on a couple of projects, but they're still pretty green in terms of their development experience. One of the things that you should know is some of the character traits of your junior developer. Your junior developer is typically very eager to learn, very eager to work on projects. They're so eager. They want to build, they want to help, and they're affordable. You can literally afford 3 junior developers for the price of a senior. So think about that. I talk to developers who are, or not developers, rather entrepreneurs who are like, I just need 1 senior developer for my project. And I say, rather than 1 senior developer, what about hiring 3 juniors, literally for the same price? And think about how much more they can accomplish. So juniors work hard, they want to learn, and they're always very eager to be involved in a project. So those are some of the traits of a typical junior developer. They might have to stop and look things up, but frankly, we all do, right? A mid-level developer is almost like a totally different species. A mid-level developer, they know the right way to do things. They've figured it out, and they know, and you can't tell them otherwise. This is the way it's done, and they're going to be head down. They don't need to go to Google. They know how to do it. They're head down, and they're just a workhorse, right? But don't dare tell them that they're doing things wrong, because they know better. These are like the teenagers of the development world, okay? They know, and their parents don't know anything, right? They know best. They're really good to have on a team too, because they can get so much work done, and you can give them tasks, and they're just head down, and they will just crush through it. They might not be as eager to learn some new technology as a junior is, but they are workhorses. Then you get to your senior level developer, and your senior level developer has been around long enough to know that they don't know, that they don't always know the best way to do things, that there are a million different ways to skin a cat. And seniors typically write a lot less code than mid-levels or juniors. Your typical senior developer is going to spend about 80% of their time thinking about a project, thinking about it and talking about it and coming up with the best way. And then they sit down and they code it like that. Like, once they have the idea in their head of how to code it, they can solve that problem really fast. And this can be frustrating to juniors and mid-levels who are sitting there toiling away, and they're working really hard, and they're like, we've been at this for hours and hours and we can't solve this. And then the senior walks up and they're like, oh, just change that to that. And boom, it works. And they're like, what the, they can also be really frustrating as a manager to work with a senior developer, because you're paying them crazy amounts of money. They make way more, these are like doctor level and lawyer level salaries that the seniors make. And you look and they're never at their desk. They're off talking to somebody, or walking around the building, or getting coffee for the 14th time today. And they can be really frustrating. But you have to realize that most of the coding is happening in their head. They're solving these problems in their head, and then they're sitting down and they write a couple of lines of code, and it's super efficient. So now, it's not to say they don't make mistakes, but seniors are also really good at mentoring your juniors. Juniors and seniors work extremely well together, because juniors want to learn, seniors want to teach and want to learn, and they can learn a lot from the juniors. One more thing about seniors is they're often really resistant to learning the latest cutting edge technology, because they've been around long enough to know that not every cutting edge, greatest, latest thing is going to be around 5 years from now. Technology comes and goes, and the senior's been around long enough to see that, to be burned by grabbing onto a new technology and then having it not be supported 5 years later. So they usually wait and see where the trends are of the industry, and then they follow those trends. And so they'll learn new technology, but after it's been a little well established. The architect is somebody that doesn't really write code. The architect is somebody that is more like an architect for a building, right? They're drawing up the blueprints and the plans, and then handing those plans over to the construction workers and general contractors and so forth that actually do the building. Sometimes the senior and the architect will be one and the same. Because a lot of architects like to get their hands dirty in code. There's, some people get pushed into that architect position where they're just building out those blueprints, don't get to write a lot of code, but most of us like to actually get our hands dirty and code a bit. Okay, so now hopefully you've got in your head, you're like, okay, I know what I need, right? And I'm kind of skipping, right? So the next part is, where do you find them? I'm leaving that till last. But now you found a couple developers, and what do you ask them, right? And then I'll go to, where do you find them, or who do you look for? So now you've got a couple developers. Maybe you're talking to interviewing a few developers or a few agencies, and what are the types of things you talk to them about? So some of it is just understanding their vocabulary. The one term that we often use in development is stack or tech stack. And this really just refers to what technology the developer uses. So you often want to ask them what tech stack they specialize in or they like to use. And typically it breaks down to the number one most popular tech stack in the world right now, or at least programming language in the world right now, is JavaScript for the last 7 years. Basically every device that you can see that has any electronics in it is probably running some JavaScript, from your thermostat to your smart speaker to your car to your pretty much everything. Most websites have some JavaScript at the very least. And now now what we get is, you'll hear developers talk about different flavors, if you will, of JavaScript, like Node, which allows you to run JavaScript on a server, or React, which is a JavaScript framework like Angular and Vue. So you'll hear these terms, but just know, if you hear Node or Angular or React or Vue, they're talking about JavaScript, which is the number one most common, for lots of good reasons, programming language in the world. What has now become, and is the fastest growing language in the world, the second most common language, is Python. And Python has some popular frameworks, namely Django and Django and Flask. And Python is awesome. Python is very easy to use. It's great for many applications. But where it owes its increased popularity to is AI, machine learning, automation, and data science and analytics. So if you're doing any of those things, Python is very much a language to consider. If you're not doing those things, it maybe, don't necessarily listen to your developers who are like, Python, 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 if you're not in that data science, AI, machine learning, or automation space. The next another really common language is PHP, which has its very, very popular framework, Laravel. It's probably the most popular framework on the web today, but it's really kind of becoming an outdated language. So you may want, it may be right for your project, but chances are JavaScript or Python would be better. And then, there's also Ruby, which has a framework, Rails. People say Ruby on Rails. Jonathan's very familiar with this one. Ruby became a really popular language especially out west in Silicon Valley, for a couple of minutes there. It was like the hottest thing, and a bunch of startups grew and blew up and started using it because it was the latest, greatest. And then they got to a point where they realized, like, oh, it's not super scalable. Maybe we shouldn't use this everywhere. really easy to learn, really fun language to play around with. And it kind of like shot up in popularity and then fell right back down. And in fact, here on the East Coast, you see it very barely used at all. It's a little more popular on the West Coast, although people aren't really using it for new projects very often. Another really popular one, especially for like Gabriel and Cameron, who we have on the line, who are game developers, is C Sharp. C Sharp and C++ are like the top two languages for game development, with C Sharp becoming ever more popular. It's also used in web development and app development used through the .NET framework. And this is very commonly used, especially for Windows applications in the financial world, and for some like real enterprise level applications as well. So along with Stack, you'll hear these acronyms where people like, so people who are using JavaScript, they'll talk about what flavors of JavaScript they're using, like Node, React, Express, and then what database they're using, like Mongo. So you get them putting this together in a acronym like MERN stack or mean stack, the difference being React or Angular. LAMP stack, old standard with PHP and MySQL. Or Fern stack with like Firebase or Firestore. So one thing I would recommend, if you're talking to a developer, ask them if they throw out some acronym and you're not sure what it is, ask them to explain themselves. That's pretty true with everything. Asking developers like to speak in these very technical language, and they try and talk over your head, especially if you're a non-technical founder. So make them explain things to you. If Einstein said, if you can't explain something clearly, you don't understand it clearly. So have them, you can even pretend to be dumb, right? Act stupid, act like you don't know what they're talking about, and say, what is that? What is mean stack? I don't know. Can you explain that to me? Make them explain it to you, make them bring it down to that 5th grade level, so that that they understand what they're talking about. Let me see, I got something in the chat here. Nerd is Node, Express, React, database. Love it, Aaron. Awesome. I haven't heard that one yet. Okay, so speaking of those frameworks like React, frameworks and libraries, ask your developers what frameworks and libraries they use, or if they use frameworks and libraries. These are ways, frameworks and libraries, I kind of lump them together. They're not exactly the same thing, but I lump them together. These are pre-built code bases that you can use that already follow best practices. You can save thousands of hours of work, avoid rebuilding the wheel. It's really useful. And occasionally you'll meet a developer, and I used to be one of these way back, who's like, oh, I don't use frameworks, I code everything myself. And that is really ignorant. So make sure you're not working with a developer that is as ignorant as I used to be. Also talk to them about how they do versioning, how they keep track of changes in the code. The most popular way is Git. There's also an old one, SVN, although most of us these days are using Git. And along those lines, talk to them about their development strategy, right? Like I mentioned with DevOps, usually you typically you develop locally on your own machine. You have an environment that you work in. And then when you're ready to test it, you can deploy in the cloud to like a development environment. You test it there with your team. And then once you've got it working, you deploy to a staging environment where you can show your client or show the C-level executives or whatever, and have them look at those changes in staging before you push to production and go public. There's also similar terminologies like blue-green development or red-green development, which relates to testing. So just get in that conversation, talk to them about what their strategy is, and make sure it makes sense. Another great question to ask your developer is, what do you do if you get stuck? My students at Boca Code, they all know that they come with a lifetime guarantee. right? My students, they come and work for you, and they know they've always got infinite lifelines. They can call me, call Michelle. They've got the teaching staff here. They've got their, the other students from their cohorts. They've got a great network. And, even greater than that is the Palm Beach Tech Slack channel, where you can get constant help from developers. So, make sure that they have that network that they can draw upon if they get stuck. It's a really interesting question to ask, and make sure you ask it. So, and finally, who do you look for, right? What type of developer, or where do you go? And again, so this depends on your project and so forth. But there's, one answer is having an in-house team, right? Hiring a development team in-house. The pros to that are your team is right there. They're at the ready. You get immediate feedback. You can send requests and see immediate changes. You can really supervise them and be on top of them. The cons are you have massive overhead to do this. It can be extremely difficult to acquire the right talent, and very costly, right? I've gone through processes where, with this, where you don't get the right talent, and then you're months behind, and it could, cost a lot of money. And then oftentimes you have to train them and get them up on the technologies that you're using, or get them ready for your project. Another alternative is an agency, right? And this is like that what you want, right? These have full staff. A good agency will have full staff that can cover all of your needs, all the resources and experience that you need, all the training. Um, the cons are oftentimes that they're not cheap, right? Because you're paying for all of that. Wrapped into the cost is all that experience and all of those resources. So sometimes this can be a little bit of an expensive route. Locally, we've got two awesome agencies, Silver Logic and Peak Activity. There's a few others, but those are great places to start. And really, when you hire an agency, remember, you don't want cheap, right? Because on this triangle here, when you go to cheap, you're going away from good and you're going away from fast, right? So an agency might be more expensive, but you're getting that, the quality code, and you're getting it at a good speed. Another alternative is going local freelance, right? So hiring somebody, like a Jonathan, or we have, from, even, you can get super senior people like Damian Montero in our community does some freelance work, all the way down to somebody very junior who's just looking for a little bit of experience. These people will often respond very quickly, are able to meet in person, and the pricing can vary quite a bit. Um, the cons are, you have to be careful with the quality, and maybe get some references to know that you're getting good quality. The speed can vary. Some freelancers are really quick, especially if this is one of their only projects. The cost can vary pretty widely. You might get somebody who's at a low hourly rate, but they take forever to build your project. You might get somebody at a high hourly rate, but they can knock your project out quickly. So you need to do that math. And if you want, here's my email. You can reach out to me. I know a ton of local freelancers. If you are a local freelancer, get in touch with me so that I know to add you to that list when I recommend you. There's also non-local freelancers, right? Everybody knows, you can go on, these websites that you could find non-local freelancers from other countries and so forth, and oftentimes find people. Oops, sorry, I meant to put my computer in do not disturb. Sorry, there we go. That's my opportunity to do that. You can often find these students, or these non-local freelancers, at a really low rate, but their quality can vary greatly, and the speed can vary greatly, and their response time is often very slow. I hear this all the time. you know, I left a position where, and they hired two freelancers overseas that at like a fraction of what they were paying me. And they're like, oh my God, we're paying these guys so little. It's ridiculous what we were paying you. And then, you know, 2 months later, they came back to me and they're like, Todd, we gave them a project that would have taken you 5 minutes, and it was 2 months ago, and they still haven't done it. So, you know, what you think is cheap might not be cheap. So, and part of that is communication. They would tell them, hey, I need you to add this button to the website. And they were like, what's a button? What's a website? I mean, not literally, but it was, you know, they had to explain every step of the way. So one of the biggest, most important take home messages for today, clear communication is key. Make sure whoever you hire understands you and you understand them. This is one of the toughest things. You need to make sure that you can communicate with your developer. And I'll reiterate this, hire a team that understands you and understands your project. When you're talking to a developer about your project, if they're struggling to understand it, or they started to ask you questions and you're like, no, what are you talking about over here? This is my project over here. That's very different than when you talk to somebody and they're like, oh my God, this is great. And we could do this and this. And you're like, yes, yes. And you're on the same page. That's what you want. Find that. And this is a little bit of self-promotion. I apologize for this, but there's now a fifth option that didn't exist in the past. This is brand new with Boca Code. Hire a teaching institute, right? As far as I know, we're the only ones that have this model. You know, think about like a teaching hospital, right? You go get surgery at this hospital, you go get surgery at a teaching hospital. Big difference is at the teaching hospital, you've got like 6 surgeons overlooking your surgery, right? The pros are you're paying a discounted rate. You're having your quality assured by senior staff. You're going to get a fast response, maybe not as fast as an agency where that's their primary focus, right? They're here at a teaching institute. Our primary focus is education, and working on these projects is secondary. But because we're an educational institute, we also have the ability, a tax deductible option to pay us. You can donate through a scholarship fund, and which actually is run by Palm Beach Tech. Thank you, Nikki. So you can donate to our scholarship fund, help support Palm Beach Tech, help support our students, and get like a 75% tax deduction on your development project. You know, the cons are, like I said, the speed might not be as fast as an agency because first and foremost, we're an educational institute. So again, if this is also an option that's enticing to you, reach out to Michelle and myself, or you can just reach out to info@bocacode.com. That comes to all of us. So now I gave you all these options. What do you choose? If you're doing a big giant project, or you're a big giant company with lots and lots of funding, you either want to go agency or in-house. You know, you weigh those options, but those are going to be your best options. If you're doing a small project or you're a startup with not a lot of funding, you want to either go local freelance or a teaching institute. Notice the one that I don't ever recommend is non-local freelance. I get people coming to me literally every single week that are like, Todd, I hired this developer and I paid him so much money and nothing, I got crap from it. And then I hired this other developer and now they can't even finish my project. So can you finish my project? And they've already spent so much money, wasted so much money by the time they came to me. So don't waste your money. I don't recommend non-local. Stick with local, stick with somebody that you trust, somebody that understands your project. And these are my recommendations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to any questions and invite you guys to check us out at bocacode.com. Whoa. Where'd y'all go? Oh, there you are. All right. And welcome Aaron and Zosia and John.
Yoshitake.
Okay. So Thanks for bearing with me for that presentation. Does anybody have any questions or comments or, um, want to throw something back in my face? I could take it, criticism.
I got a I got a suggestion about how relating to hiring someone for your project. You may not know the level of experience and knowledge when hiring this said person, or at least interviewing. My suggestion is evaluating their skills through technical assessments. When I've been interviewing, I've been given some assessments relating to my C# skills, and it does reflect how much I don't. It does reflect how much that candidate knows, and makes a big can be a big factor on how they can work on your project.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of different philosophies there, James. I know some companies like uh not Peak Activity, Silver Logic. Thank the Silver Logic. They do is they if you apply to Silver Logic, they give you a project. If you can complete that project, you're basically hired.
Yeah,
If
that's a good.
you What'd you say, John?
I said I agree with that. I definitely feel like knowing how to code and actually putting projects together are two separate fields. I don't think coding challenges, someone may not understand a coding challenge, but they may be able to throw a great website in a matter of minutes. So it really does depend on their past projects, in my opinion. I definitely think that's something to consider. Look at their portfolio for freelancers. If they don't have a portfolio, that should be a red flag. And then, of course, check out their GitHub and their other things like that, see how they code, and then see, try to give them something relevant to what they're used to see how they handle it, how fast and quickly they can come up with solutions once you throw stuff at them. Because I work with an agency, and that's kind of what we do with our guys. We make sure not that they know how to do all the coding in the world, but that they can handle the work that we give them.
Right. Yeah, that's those are all very I agree with everything you said, except for the fact that I work with a lot of non-technical founders. And a non-technical founder, James, they don't know how to give a coding challenge. And John, they don't know how to go into your GitHub and evaluate your code. So this is, I give this talk, I've kind of am gearing this talk kind of to a non-technical founder, which I work with a lot. But you guys are absolutely right. And, there's on the other end of the spectrum are a few other companies, like I've talked to some companies at Palm Beach Tech where they're not, they're less interested in your technical skill as they are in your cultural fit. um, at for me, it's so important that my team works well together, that your specific technical skill is a little bit less important than, your ability to work as a team, your ability to communicate. That to me is very important. And, I'll give you a perfect example. We have a huge tech company here, right here in Boca, called Modernizing Medicine. And they realized very early that they didn't need good coders, they needed doctors. And, the CEO decided, you know what, I can hire on a doctor and teach him how to code a lot better than I can hire on a developer and teach them how to be a doctor. So, there's some different philosophies, and again, it really depends on your project. So it's not every project, not every company needs to evaluate your specific skills. You want to come work with me, right? You've got to be able to learn, you've got to be a good cultural fit. I could teach you the skills, right? If you're missing a specific skill, you're going to learn it from me, right? Or, maybe you have skills like, Jonathan's got skills that I'm learning from him. And, it's so there's give and take when you work with developers. But for a non-technical for a non-technical founder, it's really tough. But yeah, Nikki said in the chat, it's those soft skills that are so important, and those are a lot harder to measure. Right? Aaron said, regarding the teaching institute model, San Diego Code School has been doing something somewhat similar. Awesome, and sent a link. I'll have to check that out. Um, but yeah, the soft skills are really important, and that's something that thankfully for Palm Beach Tech, we have these committees, and one of them is a tech talent committee, and they've evaluated across the board, across all these companies, what are the soft skills and hard skills that are missing in our local talent pool. And at Boca Code, we're actually modeling our curriculum based on those needs, right? What the local companies are telling us that are needed, and making sure that our students who graduate have the wide gamut of the soft and the hard skills that are needed. So, and James just showed us a book called Soft Skills by John Sonmez. I haven't actually heard of that one, but hopefully that one's worthwhile.
I heard that book is really good.
Yeah.
It teaches about how to it just teaches the soft skills for developers, not just on the technical side. Here's the book cover that I'm trying to show.
Yeah.
My background is preventing me from doing so. So the best one would be to show it with my profile in the picture.
There we
Can
go.
you all see it?
Yeah, we got it.
Cool.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, I thank you guys so much, and hope this was worthwhile. And I appreciate you guys coming, and please check us out, bocacode.com. If you're interested in any of our classes, reach out. Right now, we're not advertising them on our website because of our licensing that we should be getting hopefully by the end of this month. So if you're interested in any of the classes, reach out to me or Jonathan or Michelle, or even Nikki knows how to get us, and so does Dennis. Heather's a student of ours as well. So, and Mariella we've got on the call. She's one of our top rock star developers. So she's amazing, and one of our TAs as well. So thank you guys all, and I hope you guys have a great Global Entrepreneur Week.